Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much to Norton Rose Fulbright for once again hosting us. I believe this is the fourth time Blue and Norton Rose Fulbright have collaborated for panel and debate and discussion. We call it Perspectives. And this year, as I hope you've read from the brief you should have, we're looking for perspectives around the issue of oversupply and sustainable scrapping. It's a very broad topic, but hopefully it will make more sense to all of us. I'm a little bit like Phil, a little bit out of my comfort zone, but thankfully we have a panel that aren't. We've intentionally invited panelists from across various particular verticals on this topic. Who hopefully, and I'm sure, having just been next door for an hour, will provide some really interesting perspectives. I want to say thank you to you as well, for those in the audience of coming out today. It's great to see that there are no barriers to Londoners continuing with life, rain or otherwise, so thank you for that. We're going to start by, I'll introduce the panel, and then on an individual basis, going to ask them all just to give a very short introduction and initial thought around today's subject. So starting to my right, if that's okay, I want to introduce Rick Power. Rick is Senior Manager, Green Recycling Services with Wilhelmsen Ship Management. Rick, the floor is yours.
Yeah, first of all, good afternoon, and once again, thanks very much for coming out. I've travelled from KL, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. A very interesting topic, with especially the green ship recycling rules and regulations, and also financial incentives that will be brought up this afternoon. What we want to see as well is a knee-jerk kind of action that can sustain green ship recycling by injecting incentives, basically, to the market. We see a number of assets, specifically offshore assets, laid up, both in cold layup and warm layup. A number of these assets will never enter into the market again. So what we need to do is review how best we can get these into the recycling program. And that's hopefully what we're going to be doing this afternoon, by finding a way and means to get them into the recycling market.
Thank you, Rick. So Rick, I should have said, representing a ship management company, Perspective. Delighted to have to my right Nikos Mikelis. Nikos is an independent consultant and also a non-executive director of GMS, and great to have Nikos here because he brings such knowledge and experience around ships recycling in general. Nikos.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My background is more on ship recycling than the economic issues of oversupply. I see that in the last 8 years, the world fleet has grown by 50% in tonnage terms, so that obviously is an issue. Whether ship recycling is capable of coping with that and how the ships are going to be encouraged to go for scrap, that should be the subject of discussion, and that will be where my contribution will be today. Thank you.
Thank you. To my left, Jürgen Werner, partner in Brussels with Norton Rose Fulbright. Jürgen brings with him a wealth of legal experience, but particularly knowledgeable around regulation. So again, very grateful to have you here, Jürgen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all of you to be here, and hopefully we have a good discussion, because I think there's a lot to discuss. Background on my side, and as I also said about this, I'm a competition regulatory lawyer. We also advise the Commission on several port-related or transport-related issues ourselves. I think it's so far a very interesting topic because it's not only the shipping industry, but I mean it's the combination of an environmental and political issues, trying to sort out commercial issues. And the question is, how does it work? We have seen this in several other transport modes as well. If you take the automotive industry, where you had got a certain incentive, we have got now the electrical cars, and last not least, we see it also now, let's say, the attempt to use the shipping industry, or let's say oversupply the shipping industry, to combine that with this analysis. I believe we have a lot of thought here how we can handle that and what kind of interest we are looking for to take care of industry matters, to take care of the shipping industry and ship management industry, the shipyards, and last not least, we should also not forget, all of us, we are as the taxpayer who might pay for incentives, and if that is the right issue to do.
Thank you, Jürgen. And to Jürgen's left, delighted to have Martin Stopford, who many of you will know, president of Clarkson's, claims to be semi-retired, although I have not seen any evidence of that. And as you also know, Martin has a tremendous background and knowledge and reputation in shipping economics, so we're very pleased to have you here, Martin.
Thanks, Alistair. It's a great pleasure to be here on this fairly, I would say, eclectic debate. It's, and in fact, historically, I'd say this is about the stage in very big cycles when the topic of scrapping old ships comes up. And personally, I'm a keen supporter of the free market, and but I also accept that ship owners need an equally strong regulatory framework within which to operate. And if you can get those two things to work, then you will get a good result. And so, as the topic here is, we're bound to pick up things like subsidies for scrapping and that sort of thing. Not sure this is really the way we should be going, but that's what we're here to debate. The two previous big recessions, 1929 to 1936, the UK Chamber of Shipping, which was absolutely the leader of shipping at the time, started debating scrap and build schemes in 1932. Or scrapping schemes. They were not keen on the build part in those days, but the government was very keen on the build part because in those days UK had about half the world shipbuilding industry, and the government saw scrap and build as a good way to support the shipyards, which on the whole had more votes than the ship owners. And so the scheme came to fruition about 1936, and the recession ended about halfway through 1937. So it really was a bit too late. The bus had gone by the time it arrived. And there was a lot of talk in the 1980s recession about scrap and build schemes. Jim Davis was notorious for leading the IMF delegations around the world to talk to everybody, and they did very effectively. But again, in the changing environment, it ran into difficulties. And I think that one of the telling points that comes up in all of this is that for any of these schemes to work, there has to be a fairly high degree of international consensus and agreement, and that is not an easy thing to get in the middle of a recession. So I feel we should be focusing on the efficient use of old ships and really looking at them as assets to be used as well as they can be, and when they can't compete effectively in the marketplace, then that's the time to scrap it.
Thank you, Martin. And finally, Janina Lamb. Janina's head of dry cargo research at Howe Robertson Partners, and I particularly like to thank Janina for stepping in at the 11th hour. Janina.
Yeah. So I cover the dry bulk market at Howe Robinson Partners. So today I will be only able to talk about the dry bulk market, but in my view, that is a market that remains endemically oversupplied if you strip out the boom time. And I think in terms of to tackle the order oversupply problem, we maybe should look at it the other way around, not only looking at scrapping, but maybe start with the yards and the new building price.
Thank you, Janina. As many of you will have hopefully read from the brief, the catalyst for this debate and discussion was broadly discussions held last year at Danish Maritime Days, when a number of, I guess, very distinguished ship owners in particular, from both the shipping industry and the offshore sector, sat in a room for a day. And the topic, the discussion, was around aligning book value with real market value assets. And I think you might say that there was a lot of finger pointing at the banks. They recognized that there was a $90 billion black hole in terms of the $400 billion shipping fleet asset value. And they looked and explored at ways, as was hinted by the panelists, at both incentivizing with carrots and then also some sticks around how we might stimulate the market. Their conclusions were broadly around recalibrating free market forces to reflect true asset value. And the second was some degree of regulatory intervention. Some of you may have heard of a cash for clunker scheme, which was introduced in the US for gas-guzzling cars back in the 80s. So they looked at that kind of thing. Interestingly, in discussion with some of the panelists, we felt we wanted to add another prong, which was the role of the shipyards. And so should the shipyards indeed have more responsibility when it comes to looking at oversupply in the market? So we will touch on that subject, and I've got some initial questions. I think, having been next door with the panel, we don't have a bank. We did expect to. We may touch slightly less briefly on the conclusions of Danish Maritime Days around banking. However, it would be great just to understand from the panelists, and I think, Rick, it's a great place to start, whether, from your perspective, particularly on the offshore side, how serious and endemic this issue is. And I quote Carsten Mortensen, who was the CEO of BW Group, who told Danish Maritime Days, the offshore sector has a structural overcapacity problem from OSVs to drill ships, and the problem will only be resolved through scrapping.
It's not just OSVs and drill ships. If you review the first quarter report on the global offshore recycling, you'll see that 44% of the global jack-up fleet remain stacked, laid up, whereas most of these assets are built pre-1990. The semi-sub market shows 71% of legacy semis remain stacked, and these are also pre-1990 built. But we expect a decrease due to the number of assets being retired. In those figures alone, it shows that we have to do something to align our recycling regime, which is also very difficult if you think that the owners have invested heavily for that cash cow. They don't want to, they've got to go to their stakeholders, their board members, to impinge on them that it's no longer a viable asset, it's no longer profitable. So do they put it on cold layup as opposed to recycling? We would definitely like to see them recycled, to clean the decks, basically, and to inject further interest.
And just moving that forward, though, I mean, in terms of some of the ideas we've heard, what would be, your suggestions for doing that?
Well, as we discussed next door, one of the catalysts, obviously, is the Hong Kong Convention, EU regulations. Hong Kong Convention, at the moment, that's not going to be ratified until 15 countries have joined. There's currently 9 joined. Denmark being the seventh one. Denmark being the 7th that joined on the 9th of May. Belgium is due to join 2017, this month, this year. Also, you have the catalyst for increased recycling, which would be your ballast water treatment, but that's not going to get pushed until 2020. Plus, there's going to be a leeway time. So again, if you think that it's going to take upwards of maybe $2 million to have a ballast water treatment refit on an aged asset, what are you going to do? You're going to go for a refit, knowing that it's going to be pretty tough when you take that asset out of operation, you have it refitted it, and you try to enter it back into the market as an aged asset, as opposed to recycling? It's a question that's heavily on our minds.
Thanks. And interestingly, I guess a lot of the discussion around Danish Maritime Days was around incentivizing scrapping. So the notion of a scrapping subsidy for vessels, including offshore floating assets, scrapped under the Hong Kong Convention. That was their conclusion. Interestingly, last week, ABN, AMRO, who were meant to be here, ING, NIBC, and Scandinavian SEB banks all signed up to introducing what they call the Responsible Ship Recycling Standard. In other words, if you want their ship financing, if you want to engage with them, then as an owner, it strikes me, and seemingly you have to also sign up to this RS agreement. And bringing in Jürgen, we obviously talked about cash for clunkers. It's something you're familiar with. That's obviously an incentive scheme. It feels like this announcement last week is a bit of a stick to as opposed to the carrot. Can a carrot or stick or both actually work? Are we being realistic, going back to Martin's point?
Well, indeed, I think this is a kind of attempt here. I think for twofold. The first, the attempt is to, let's say, give weight and gravitas to the European regulation, because currently the Hong Kong Convention is not yet in force. The only thing what is worldwide in force, let's say from a worldwide perspective, is the EU regulation. But the EU regulation has got a major disadvantage because it's only policing the EU. So ships are which on the EU flag. So therefore, and as long as there's the opportunity to flag it out at a very late time, you can escape it. So in the end of the day, it's a kind of first start to go into the route of regulation, but I mean it's by far perfect, and even the EU is thinking about incentivizing companies not to flag out at the end of a life cycle of a ship in order to keep the regulation on. That might be one of the issues. I'm, however, not so sure if that's the only issue the banks have got. I think the banks really have got a big issue. Important issue is, of course, the value they have got in their books and the value of their loans. And of course, it increases, of course, the political power on the member states, on the EU, for instance, to take this cash for conquest, which we have seen in other areas, as I said, in the automotive industry, now in the electrical car industry. But it has always a very specific issue. It was supposed to help the European industry or industry segments. The question here is, why should the European industry, or why should the European member states, and in addition also the EU, should support a kind of cash for conquest in the case of ships? Because the number of shipyards in the EU is relatively limited. I mean, the most important shipyards for scrapping are not within the EU currently. In the day, also the shipbuilding is not predominantly in the EU. So why should there be an incentive for that? I think it's an attempt to combine regulation, Hong Kong, the EU regulation, which has been for totally other reasons than commercial reasons, for the protection of workers and also environmental issues, to use it or potentially try to use it in order to get a commercial outcome. I'm not sure if that's the right way one should go, because I mean, of course, the member states and the EU Commission, they have to protect also the taxpayers' rights. And there's also the issue of state aid. We come from an oversupply, might come from over a distorted market to tax incentives and other ways they have been supported in the past. And now to use another distortion by giving incentives for scrapping to solve the oversupply problem, I think would be probably counterproductive. And legally very questionable.
And on the announcement last week, which is, I guess, a bit of a stick from the banks.
Well, I mean, we had last week as well also the insolvency of Rigmas, so another company. So, I mean, of course, the banks see that it cannot continue like that because they lose value because, I mean, the ship company lose value. So it's probably a kind of cry out, do something in order to help us and to help also the ship owning companies. But again, I'm not sure if this is the right way to do it. And legally speaking, we have got a big issue here because what is really the interest of the European industry to have this? Or is it more a kind of incentive for external industries?
Sure. Thank you, Jürgen. Janina, I shouldn't have, but I will quote you from earlier. You talked about an endemically oversupplied market in the dry sector. It'd be great to hear your perspectives from your particular segment.
Okay, sure. So the dry bulk market is a very big market. We have 11,500 ships on the water, and it's highly fragmented. So we have, I think, the top 5 owners. They own less than 10% of the tonnage capacity. And because it's so fragmented, because we have very low entry and exit barriers. We have so many individuals who take independent decisions from each other. And when it comes then to the supply side, decisions are based whether you order a new building or not. That really depends on the new building price. Well, first of all, it depends on the market. But also the new building price and whether the price is attractive or not, that depends on your alternatives. So in my view, it is more about the yard capacity, which basically drives the price, than scrapping that leads to that problem of an endemically oversupplied dry bulk market. And scrapping is in my view, it's more the result of a bad market, but it has never prevented a bad market. So this is why, in my view, it is maybe we should tackle the problem from the other way around, but I wouldn't exactly know how either.
Yeah, thank you. We will certainly come on to the yards. Martin, you touched on in your introduction, you're in favour generally of a non-interventionist approach. Any occasion where some intervention may be advantageous?
I think the biggest danger with this sort of strategy at the moment is that you just get left high and dry because, we're now 8 years into the cycle, which is an enormously long way into a shipping cycle. I mean, there's not many that last that long. A few last 12 years, but not many. I think we're past the bottom of the cycle. There's a lot of signs last year that last year was sort of looked like it was as bad as it gets. One of them was that there was almost no bulk carriers ordered. Unusual, During earlier years in the cycle, there was 100. I mean, was it 2013? There was 100 million tons ordered.
I think so, yeah.
100 million tons of bulkers ordered. 5 years into the cycle. I mean, that's, no wonder it lasted a long time, but that has now stopped. Sentiment, I think owners are looking for very, very good prices before they'll order at the moment. They want to be bribed into buying. So the order book is now small. I mean, the bulker order book, 7.5% of the fleet. It's not a lot. The world economy is recovering. It is looking better than it was last year. And the prices, so that means that the trouble is the prices will start to edge up. And the arbitrage, say a 20-year-old 40,000 ton bulker, scrap price $300, less than $2 million, right? Market price this week, $5 million. So you've got $3 million arbitrage on that. And in an improving market, I think people will tend to hang on unless you give them, you're going to have to bribe them. You're going to have to spend a lot of money getting them to change their view. That's I don't know how Janina feels about that, but since I've been wandering into your territory, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, I agree, and this is exactly what I was trying to say, that in a normal, when you look at the market and you look at it historically, you would normally, this is why the dry bulk ships trade around until they fall apart almost, because you normally get a premium when you sell it secondhand. And so no matter what the scrap price in a way, it's never really been an incentive for scrapping. It's almost the other way around, at least in the past. The scrap price being correlated to the steel price being correlated to the iron ore price. If the iron ore price is high, so that means if your scrap price is high, that means the demand for iron ore is high, and this is also when you need the ships to carry that iron ore, and that means also your market is up. So during the boom time, when we saw record high iron ore prices and very high scrap prices, we didn't see much scrapping. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I want to bring Nikos in. Nikos, China, you mentioned, have a scrap and build scheme. Apart from perhaps exemptions like that, and it'd be interesting just to hear a little bit more about that. From your perspective, have you seen any attempts at incentives or indeed carrots, sticks, such as the announcement last week from the bank?
What a confusing question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hopefully we can get a very unconfusing answer.
I'm not sure I can unravel it. I fear...
Should we start with China?
Let's start with China. China is offering, since December 2013, is offering a subsidy for scrapping and a subsidy for building. The two are independent, to Chinese owners, Chinese national companies who have Chinese flagship. And the sum they offer is noticeable for a new building. It's $120 per GT, which very approximately maybe something like $5 million for a Panamax. And it's the same $120 for the recycling per GT, which converts on a very approximate ratio of GT to LDT to $360 per ton. So the Chinese ship owner who scraps a ship gets $360 from his government per ton, when the international price of scrapping or recycling is no better than 320. So he's getting that from the government, and he's getting also the $200 that the Chinese yards are paying. So that is one subsidy that I suppose is made to help the Chinese fleet to get renovated or renewed, to keep the yards busy and to keep the recycling yards afloat, because the recycling in China, I should stress, is suffering since 2013, since about the summer of 2013. I presume that is because of the price of iron ore. China is primarily, it's the biggest steel maker in the world by far. It's more than 50, well, it's 50% of the world's production, but more than 90% of that they produce through iron ore, and 10% through electric arc furnace, which is based on scrap. As the years have passed, with the price of iron ore going down, China has reduced the electric arc furnace production, has reduced its imports to scrap, and therefore it has reduced its need for recycling ships. So all of this complicated picture tells you what's happening in China.
Thank you.
That was the question.
That was the first part.
Right.
The second part was, in your experience, and not least given what ABN and other banks announced last week, are you seeing more intervention in terms of incentives or disincentives to scrap?
Now I understand. Thank you. I understand, because I had misunderstood the ABN AMRO action. I thought it was not an incentive. I thought it was a mistake. Whereas on one hand, it makes absolute good sense for banks to promote responsible recycling, it doesn't make any sense for banks to promote recycling according to the European regulation. And that is what made me think that ABN AMRO's and two other banks have maybe misunderstood how SIP recycling works these years. Now, I could explain why, but I'm not sure you want me to, because I would take a long time.
We might come on to that. I think we might come on to that. But thank you. But other than that, you from us,
I cannot see. I really cannot see an external force. Somehow, I am total sympathy with Martin. I think things work out on their own. We live in a period that there is too much crowdedness everywhere in business, in assets, and so on. It will have to sort out itself. I don't think it makes sense for governments to subsidize scrapping. Why not give the money to the ship owners straight away and save the middleman, the scrapper? I cannot see anything happening there. I cannot see regulatory intervention. We put our faith on ballast water. Certainly, ballast water will get rid of a lot of ships, but it's a moving feast. It is yet delayed. It will be probably agreed in July at IMO to delay it by 2 years. And I believe that ship owners will themselves renew the certificates just in time to delay it for up to 5 years. So that's not going to solve the problem in the very near future. All the other environmental regulations affect ships throughout the industry in the same way. It's fuel, it's sulfur, it's the price of fuel. There is very little I can see coming from regulation to clean the fleet.
Okay, thank you. We have a webinar audience today as well, and I want to encourage them, please, to type in their questions. Not quite sure where on the screen that can happen, but I'm sure it's pretty self-obvious. And indeed, to the members of the audience, if you have any questions, please put your hand up, and this is a good time to ask after the first round. Are there any questions on this particular discussion that you'd like to ask? Please. Can we just wait for a mic? There you go. Thank you.
Talking about incentives for scrapping vessels, the Italians had a system back in the 90s, which proved quite successful. It got rid of a lot of vessels, and a lot of the Italians ordered new ships, and the fleets were renewed. So maybe a system like that could prove helpful in the future.
And what was the objective?
The objective was to give money to the Italian Confederation of ship owners. Created a scheme, and they said, well, we need money, and they managed to introduce it and get the money. That was the real gist of the whole issue, but in the end, it did prove quite useful.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments at this stage?
We have a question from the webinar audience. This is from Nicholas Ganas from LQM Petroleum Services, and he asks, are there currently any regulations at the IMO level being discussed to incentivize either the building of energy efficient ships or to penalize older ones and make it more appealing to scrap them?
I think the short answer might be no, but Nikos?
I would say not directly. There is a requirement to calculate the efficiency index of the ship, but that doesn't mean that you pay more taxes or something. The only thing that will affect in some way, as I mentioned before, is that ships that burn more fuel would have to pay a heavier fuel bill. And if the price of fuel goes up as the years go by, that's the only thing I can see. Other than that, it's ballast water treatment convention that we discussed that.
Not on the IMO level, but I mean the EU has done a study recently, has ordered a study to incentivize ship owners to stay under a European flag or EU flag in order to give full flavor to the regulation. It's not clear yet how far it will go and it will come at all. Again, there's a kind of attempt to make what they believe as an environmental and human rights issue to make it fly. And in the end, who is going to pay for it? Will it come out of the EU budget or for the member states will to be seen? What you mentioned with regard to the Italian situation, I think that's a clear case, from my point of view, of state aid. I mean, nothing else. The question is, and that we can also discuss, who is profiting of state aid? There's always a specific group you want to do, a specific industry, and can it be rationalized? When you see, as I mentioned earlier, when you see scrapping, who do you want to, what kind of interest you deal with? The ship owners, the yachts, the general public? I think the ship owners, of course, might have an interest to do so. As I said before, I mean, there was the insolvency, or probably several insolvencies. The question is, should you not better give immediately funding to them because they are in a crisis? Why should you then incentivize scrapping to everybody? The second question is, however, we come from a distorted market. Why do we have got the oversupply? It's partly over, and the reason is also in the EU, it's not only China. We had certain tax incentives on the member state level who were really helping out to get oversupply. Would you now keep that distortion going on, or let's say cure by another distortion of the market? Because all the time, and I'm very much like what you said, Martin, before, always if the state does an intervention, is a kind of distortion of the market. Is that really necessary? Is it in the interest of the industry? Is it in the interest of, again, the taxpayer? Is it of the interest of the industry within the European Union? I have serious doubts. We can, of course, not put only the finger against the Chinese. The Chinese, we can probably try to do something on the WTO level. Also, I have doubt that we get through with this legally. It will take at least many, many years to have a result of that, if we have got a mechanism in any way. I think it's always the question, can we have got in the globalized industry a kind of defeat by subsidies and concern? I think Europe should have to stand not to do so. It has been a kind of issue of the commercial side, and my own hindsight to the banks, and by the difficult situation of the ship owners. But I think the industry has to sort out itself, or try to get a reasoning for specific companies who are in specific need and specific justifications, but not to have a kind of system where everybody might get something in order to sort out commercial problems. I think that would be against the spirit.
No, I think the just picking up this point, shipbuilding subsidies seem to come up a lot more than shipping subsidies on the whole. And interestingly, the numbers that Nico gave for China are exactly the same, 17% subsidy, I make it on a Panamax today, which actually is the same level of subsidy as the EU permitted, I think, under the 6th Directive in 1986. We were only allowed 16%, 17% subsidy. I remember it vividly because, unfortunately, we could only just buy the materials for what price we could get in the market. Our cost-price gap in the UK in 1986 was about 40%. And so, and the net result is that we have no merchant shipbuilding industry in this country anymore, to speak of, just some very small yards. And these are big issues for politicians, and it's a lot of employment, it's a lot of jobs, and of course it's a very big issue in China, where there are a lot of people working in the shipbuilding industry. And in Europe, I would suspect it's less of an issue now, because the European shipbuilders, who incidentally took half the world's orders last year, all cruise ships, in value, not in tonnage, but they are so pleased about that. A terrific success, and a great success for diversification and for those who survived. But
without state aid.
Without state aid. Well, you said that without moving your lips. We always had a suspicion there was a bit came in through other channels, but let's not discuss that. But I think the aid to ship owners, and again, I mean, who wouldn't want to give Italian ship owners a bit of help now and then? But I think probably scrap and build is a tough way to do it, if you know what I mean. I like this idea of just giving them some money, you know.
I didn't say I was in favour.
Oh, well, I think it's...
I was just reporting
I think it's a very, very helpful thing to hear, you know.
Now we should see where it's actually used. I mean, this cash for clunkers was mentioned. I mean, we had it in the car industry, but it was a very short program in several member states, and it was, of course, a help through a difficult time with a certain amount. This is a one-off. Now we have got, which is not a success at all, for electrical cars, in order to promote electrical cars. There's a lot of money sitting there, nobody's using it. All right, so I mean, there's an attempt. So the question is always, why should the state intervene, or why should an institution intervene, and for what reasoning? And is it a one-off, or is it just a kind of spilling money around because you believe you can help the market?
Although in Norway, the electric cars seem to do better, because I think they've put in a lot of infrastructure and so forth. And so if you buy a Tesla, you can actually recharge it while you're having a drink in the hotel, you know. Of course, you couldn't drive it when you
but
come out.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can also use the taxi lanes as well, electric cars.
I wanted to pick up again on the cash for clunkers, because one thing that came up next door was that even if you worked on the premise that this was a good idea for shipping, and something Martin raised, was it's very hard to identify what is a clunker and what isn't. And that I've certainly seen in terms of some of the right ship data. We've got new vessels that have EVDI scores that are comparable with ships that are 20 years old. Martin cited some similar examples. And I wanted to sort of move the conversation on to the yards, and we will definitely come back to scrapping and recycling, and the responsibility they may have or may not in terms of building more environmentally friendly, more efficient vessels, and then touch on the fact that, you know, a number of the yards have been bailed out recently, and arguably the yards are not actually working within market forces, quite the contrary. Martin, would you mind picking that one up?
Yes, I mean, you say responsibility of the yards for building more efficient vessels. I mean, the problem, in a sense, is that they had a good cant around this, the eco ships. And now I took a good look at the Japanese. I would say, I don't know if there's any Koreans here, but I don't think many shipbuilders have come to this seminar, right? The Japanese put a lot of energy into eco ships in the way that they could in the last 6 or 7 years, and there was six different 60,000 ton Supramax designs, and on the average was 28 tons per day across the 6 designs. They're all much the same at 14.5 knots. That was the average for those ships, and they had all, you know, you can reckon that they had done everything you could conceivably do, and a few other things that you couldn't conceivably do, but you know what engineers are like when they start doing these things. And that compares with an average fuel efficiency, fuel consumption for 60,000 ton bulkers over the last 20 years of about 32 tons per day, and that curve is flat. it's been pretty steadily about 32, with some above the line at 34, 36, and these are the ones that I was discussing before in the previous. We had a sort of pre-session warm-up to make sure we all disagreed with each other, really, if you go back to the early 80s, yards like Burmeister and Wayne in Copenhagen were building Panamaxes, which were just as efficient as the eco ships today. So I think what's happened is not that the eco ships haven't been a success, but really it's recycling old technology, and we're looking for new technology, and I'm absolutely convinced that the new technology we're talking about is the communication and information-based technology, and we need to be delivering ships which are digitally ready, and this just isn't happening. I mean, I just was having a chat with someone the other day who was putting in some of this stuff on existing ships, and there was nowhere to put the servers. They ended up putting the servers in the corridor because there wasn't certainly not a server room. And I think the whole question of communication on board the ship's a Faraday cage, the management of all these sensors and so forth, that this is something that needs to be absolutely managed by the shipyard product development people, and today all they're worrying about is how you get any ship into the yard. I think this is the worst possible environment for, having worked in shipbuilding during a recession like this is a bad time to have to do that, because all your energies go into estimating for the latest crazy ship that's come up that is the only thing you've got on offer, you know. So I'm very keen on better technology, but I don't think what Nico was referring to, the EDI type technology, it's just not got the whoopee to do it, in my opinion.
I mean,
Please.
probably there's a way to think about Incentivize in a different fashion. I mean, if you look, for instance, on the trucks, and also in the aviation side, the way it was done is in a couple of countries is to incentivize people to buy this more environmental friendly trucks or planes by raising the costs. So it would give them an advantage in future to offer lower bids, because I mean they have not the same cost cycles. You could do that, for instance, with port fees. You could, let's say, in the EU, on the member states, could say, look, I mean, if we have a classification of ships coming in, and if you have got a really clunker, you pay 100, whereas if you have got a very green ship, you pay only 20. That would be something you could incentivize and say, look, I mean, that would be really, well, there must be then an agreement that there should be in all the ports, maritime ports in the EU, would accept this. For instance, in airports, you have got this kind of rules. I mean, if you have got a very loud and noisy plane, I mean, you pay more than you have got a eco-friendly plane. So I think that might be ways where the member state and the EU can really do something. The other way is the combination with tonnage tax, because this is a big incentive within the EU to help ship-owning companies. If you would combine that and say, look, I mean, you only get this most favorable tonnage tax if you have got a certain type of ships, potentially that would incentivize people really to get rid of old, environmental, not so friendly ships and build new ones. I think that might be a way to do it. I mean, this is very early days, but I think it's probably a cleverer way than just give money to get rid of scrap ships.
Yeah, I think the port fees idea is, if I may, is a really interesting one, and I know Mrs. Bulsh is very keen on doing stuff with the ports, but it does leave you with the problem of setting the benchmark against which you award the fees, and I mean, you could argue forever about that, basically.
And it's been going on for a long time. There have been a number of schemes already.
You know, I mean, Nikos was quite depreciated about the EDI, and the problem is, it's a wonderful concept, but very, very difficult to articulate reliably in a way that everybody won't dispute.
Well, I agree, it's very difficult to implement, but however, we have seen it in other industries that it works, in other industry segments.
I want to move on.
up to a point.
Yeah.
Because if we get into EVDI, we've got a whole hour and a half just on that. Janina, you talked earlier about low entry and low exit levels, perhaps I guess the question is too low, and particularly pertaining to the yards. I know you had some thoughts around that.
Yeah, actually, the low entry exit barriers in terms of not only the yard prices, but also second-hand, for example. Yeah, because it's such a fragmented market. But about the yard price, maybe I can mention a bit about the yard pricing. I think, we see the problem with yard pricing in a nutshell, that maybe the yards might be creating a false demand, ordering ships, because they do not price do not price according to the markets. For them, it's more about a steal of ton. So even if we have the different markets not correlating with each other, like tankers, bulkers, and containers whatsoever, we see the prices, however, correlating. And